So it's my pleasure to introduce Glenda Satne, who's come here from Australia, from the University of Wollongong. She works on collective intentionality, joint actions, social cognition, second person, normativity, or many themes relevant to this conference, and the role played by culture and human evolution. So as well as having written many articles on these topics, she's written a book on Wittgenstein, and she's currently writing a book on social normativity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie, for the presentation. And thank you, Jeremy and Ronald, for inviting me to be here. It's been an enormous pleasure to be part of these conversations. And I guess I need to also thank you for something even more special, which is the invitation to engage in presenting and in writing with the work of Sellars, particularly in practical philosophy. And that has been a very exciting and interesting exercise for me, like thinking what I want to write about. I think mainly because I have a lot of agreement with Sellars, though in Sellars, in a lot of my work, appears in the background, as you're agreeing with some of his key distinctions, but not engaging maybe in detail where there are disagreements or not. So what are the agreements? So one such agreement is what we heard this morning, that human intentionality is permeated by collective intentionality, that is grounded in collective intentionality, perhaps that is collective intentionality, it's implicit. I have argued this. Also, the collectivity, understood in that sense, is underpinned by intersubjective criticism and mutual accountability. Also, the theoretical and practical reasoning are intertwined, and not the least because of the truth of the previous two claims. Also, the normativity defines human minds, languages, and actions, and that human life is a normative life. Not only this, but I also really have all drawn from Sellars a very important way of thinking about the methodology of philosophy. So the idea that philosophy's aim is to understand how things, in the broadest possible sense of the term, relate to each other in the broadest possible sense of the term. And in this, and of course, then I have engaged in understanding how we should think of naturalism, or the fact that we are natural creatures that live in natural worlds, and so on and so forth. And our thinking, our minds, our actions, our language are placed in nature or are in nature. So thanks to this invitation, I was thinking, well, where is it, as what philosopher will do, where is it that Sellars and I disagree, in particular in relation to practical philosophy? And I find myself that there are some disagreements, which I don't know, and I think this audience will be able to tell me in quite a lot of detail whether it is at the end of the disagreement or not. I'm not entirely sure. But nevertheless, I do find some issues. I do have to take issue with some of the ways in which precisely Sellars describes the relation between we intentions and morality, or we intentions in morality. I will say in a minute something more about that, but I first wanted to put like a bit of that synoptic vision in thinking about where, what are the key, I think there are two key distinctions in terms of which collective intentions or we intentions have to be understood as responding to in Sellars' work. One is the distinction between pattern-governed behavior and rule-governed behavior. And other animals are capable of pattern-governed behavior. Children are capable of pattern-governed behavior. But human beings are special in that they can also have rule-governed behavior, which it characterizes human activity as reflexive, based on recognition of rules. And not only this, but that rule-following is apparently humanly unique. The other distinction that I think is very important is the distinction and the relation between hypothetical odds and categorical odds, and this marking the difference between group intentions that are conditioned upon interest and something that we could call properly shared intentions, where I think everybody in this room knows what we mean. Otherwise, I will need to say quite a lot. We'll say a little bit more. Because they are based on a universal point of view, the point of view of the moral community, or the moral point of view simpliciter, and that those can ground unconditional obligations that act that are shared by all rational beings, or that's the aim, that they would be shared by all rational beings. Now, the issue I take with Sellars, it's related with that I think there are some paradigmatic cases of we intentionality that are not based on the recognition of rules, nor are they framed in terms of a universal ought, but are then nevertheless moral. I will discuss 3 cases of this sort that I call friendship, love, and gift. So we will go back to some of what Preston was discussing in the previous session. And what I want to do is to discuss the structure of the intentions in these cases. I think they are relevantly different from the kind of case that Sellars focused on. And then how do we understand morality in those cases, and how if we can understand it in terms of we intentionality. But I'm not going to claim that all the cases of we intention or morality are like these examples. Rather, what I want to do is to show that these are paradigmatic cases, that the interest of these cases is that there is no such shared point of view in which they are based, in terms of which we can understand them. And then I want to suggest something as to how we should then address the genus of morality and its relations with we intention in a way that encompasses this. But I won't be, so I think there are other paradigmatic cases, and some of these paradigmatic cases certainly involve shared point of views. So this is not a claim that this is not the case, it's just a case that it's just not, not that it wouldn't be sufficient, but that is not necessary, because there are some paradigmatic cases that are different. So the upshot would be is that we intentions can be shared independently of whether there is a shared point of view in which they can be grounded. Now, the talk is divided in 2 parts. The first part is it's a count or recount or rational reconstruction, as someone said yesterday, of the Sellars' view. The second part is if you like, the critical part, the constructive part, where I make my argument around the paradigmatic cases. Now, lucky for me, despite being in almost the last talk, this means that I'm able to draw on everything that was discussed in the room these 2.5 days. So I will be running, and also, of course, everybody here knows very well, and we also have like a shared consciousness or common knowledge, however you want to describe it, because we've been discussing this together these last 2 days. So very quickly, I want to say that, again, synoptic view, Sellars' naturalism tries to accommodate normativity without postulating that there is something as norms that are sort of another plane or another level of ontological reality. These are based on the collective institutions of principles and standards, and they depend on human social activity. And again, Sellars' expressivism speaks of the importance of the language of agency, as opposed to the language of sciences in the cases in which this is mainly it's descriptive. And what is becoming key to understand the nature of norms is understanding the language of communal and individual intentions. And agents are key here because agents are the ones that actually adopt these rules, understand themselves in terms of these rules, and apply the rules and assess each other in terms of these rules. So these rules depend on the agents, and as Will says in his entry on Sellars in SEP, we are rule-governed creatures because we conceive of ourselves as rule-governed creatures by taking ourselves to be persons, agents acting for reasons in accordance with rules. We make ourselves persons. So then from here, what we need is an account of these norms in terms of the specific language of agency. And this analysis gives central place to, in the case of moral norms, to the role of intentions and volitions. I'm not going to say, we said a lot about this chest, that intention is a thought that motivates one to realize its content, is first personal, has motivational force, and it, as Kyle was saying yesterday, it ripes into volition, which then is accompanied by activity. And the shall statements, shall I do A, it shall be the case that B express intentions. From here, then, we can go to we intentions, and now we intentions. So we are normative judgments as we attitude can both express people attitudes, but also have a claim to intersubjective validity. And we intentions are attitudes that are not merely individual or private or solitary, but they involve a shared point of view. And that shared point of view allows for the critical assessment of each other's contribution to this action or practice that we will be involved in. This, Sellars is very explicit, does not involve a commitment to group minds, but rather only that the individuals have a special kind of intention and action with referential intention or with intention implicit there. And that we express, we shall do A in C, shall we do A in C. Now, something that Bernard emphasized both in his talk yesterday, but as well in his writing on Sellars, is the up-to-agentness or up-to-me-ness as a condition. And as well, I think this is important because when we understand the nature of a we intention, intentions are usually up to me. How is the case with the case of we intentions? We need to understand this as shall each of us, if it's up to them, do A. And that means that what others are doing is not up to me. Each one has their own role to play. And that moves them from one step at least from the egocentric perspective, just my intention, to something which is shared with others, and provides an instance of intersubjective assessment. Now, as we all know, the intendings are two in number, but the content of the intendings is the same. And then I like the way David and Bernard in their entry in the encyclopedia put the following question. How do we, so evidently we intentions are not just mere collections of individual intentions with the same content. There could be things like this, but those wouldn't necessarily be we intentions. So what is it? What is the particular relatedness between the participants that makes it the case? Then instead of having a collection of I intentions, we have a we intention that involves, that is up to each of us when relevant to act or to form the I intention. This is the distinction between primary I referential intentions and we derivative I referential intentions, the content of which is the contribution to making the case that what we intend is realized in practice. Now, importantly, this looks so little. I don't know if everyone can read, but you know the story in any case. We intentions involve a shared point of view. That's key. That's the difference. So in one case, I have a solitary private point of view. In the other case, I have a plural group we point of view. And this is what he calls the we mode. There's some debate. We saw rational reconstruction of this in Kirk's work, with some kind of way of understanding how that might work, and a different proposal by Bernard as well. The important thing is one needs to be somehow able to think as oneself as part of a group or one of us. So a player of a soccer team, a member of the Communist Party, a member of the International Philosophical Society, all of these are examples. But interestingly, the moral point of view, it requires completely abandoning, not partially abandoning, a sort of parochial egocentric perspective. So it can't be the point of view of a particular group. It has to be a universal point of view. So these would be these intentions that can or are universally shared, and they constitute the moral point of view. Now, in order to get that, and I don't want to go into a lot of detail, I just want to say a couple of things because it matters for the argument. We need to get into the distinction between hypothetical and categorical odds. So basically what I want to say here is when Sandra thinks I must do A, she's thinking I'm going to the A. This intention is not an optional premise of her practical reasoning, but actually functions as something fixed in her practical reasoning such that certain other intentions are incompatible with doing A would be excluded, and certain intentions that promote the realization of A will be then also they will be incorporated as intentions. So in this way, we can see that duties are not, according to Sellars, different from intentions, something that also Preston was discussing, but they are special intentions or intentions that can fulfill a particular role in practical reasoning. Now, for Sellars, categorical imperatives acting in the light of duties takes place when acting as a member of a group, acting on a we intention. So we need to understand what it means to act as a member of a group or group membership. And this, I think, Jeremy said quite a lot about this, relying on reasoning about values. We can see that Sellars identifies this with sharing certain founding or constitutive intentions. And in virtue of this, the existence of group of institutions, individuals have these intentions, for example, the promotion of the survival of the whooping crane. And the reality of the group depends on the maintenance on the founding intention, such as acting as a member of the group is acting in accordance with that intention, using it as something fixed in practical reasoning. And other intentions that follow instrumentally from this intention would also operate as something fixed as duties, right? So if we have the intention as a team that we are going to win the game, and I am in the position of marking the rival striker, it's imperative for me, I must do that. Okay, now, in the example, duties are relative to parochial groups, so this doesn't exclude that they could be universal duties, but it requires that if they were universal duties, then they will need to be based on the community of all people or rational beings, something which is universal. And this is where we get the need of seeking for a categorical reasonable intention in the way I'm rationally constructing this argument. And that requires that we sort of eliminate the if I'm the member of the group then. And as we all know, and it was very well discussed on the first day and also yesterday by Bill, the proposed one for Sellars is it shall we be the case that our welfare is maximized. I think it was also discussed that this is a conceptual fact for Sellars, it's not just generally accepted. But what matters for me here, this is the little bit that matters, is that the question now is for Sellars, can we demonstrate the reality of this moral community so that there is in fact that we, as we know that there is the we of the soccer team. And he thinks we could do this if we could have arguments for both this thesis here, which is what Bill was talking about yesterday. And Sellars thinks that the first one is plausible, that he has an argument for to think of oneself as a rational being is implicitly to think of oneself as subjects of epistemic odds binding on rational beings generally. But he doesn't think that he can move from there to promoting the welfare sans phrase as an intersubjective intention. Now, I want to say on this, and I know that, and I should know more, and I haven't had the time, but I want to do it, that there was a bit of distinction, and I guess the idea that, later Sellars disagrees with the former Sellars, and I'm here kind of bringing them together. And what I'm interested in here is his remarks on the problematicity, if you like, of the idea that there could be that we could show the reality of such community. He says he will take all the dialectical skill of Socrates, Hegel, or appears to this, impairs, fails. He talks about it as an ideal that we need to be reached. And he has this quote that I couldn't resist having here, because I think nobody quoted this yet. An individual can have an intention of the intersubjective form, even if no one else in point, in fact, shares it. To have this intention is to think of oneself as a member of a community consisting of all rational beings. It is possible that for a rational being to think of himself as a member of such community, even though this community does not actually exist. So, and this is kind of the point after that, like the sort of quick running through Sellars' presentation. The point I wanted to make here is that when one acts morally, or takes oneself to acting morally, one does not know that there is a community of rational beings, according to that quote. And that is that others act in the same way as we do. So when I take an intention to be following from a universal, this categorical intention of the ideal of the universal moral community, I don't know that this intention is shared, and they might not indeed be shared at all. Now, I want to say that this is problematic because, arguably, there is a parallel between individual intentions and we intentions such that if acting on individual intentions is to know in the first person that you are so acting on a we intention would require to be fully realized, to know, that be known by us. Whether you think this is each of us or us jointly, that's another debate. that we act and that we know we act in the way to satisfy the content of this intention. Now the question is, can we know that, and what it will look like if we knew that? So can intentions be known to be shared when they are shared? How would this go? If we could show that these intentions, when they are had, they could be known to be shared, then of course we will have an argument for the existence of or reality of the moral community. So that is part one. Let's get to part two, morality beyond shared points of view. So I leave that question open. Can intentions in the way, these intersubjective intentions, moral, categorically valid ones, could be known to be shared, and in what cases? So as I said, I want to discuss some examples that I think are paradigmatic of morality, but they are not the kind of thing that Sellars is talking about. And I want to remain as close to Sellars as possible because of charity, but also because, as you know, I already said, I agree quite a lot, in particular the idea of intersubjective validity I find really important for understanding morality. And then I'm going to come back to this, how do we understand this, the structure of these intentions, and how we might understand in more detail. All right. For some reason that I myself don't understand, I describe these cases in a lot of detail, which probably is not necessary. So I gave you a copy, which let's do it. Friendship, Preston. This is between Nicola and Andre. They come from different countries. They have different socioeconomic backgrounds. Their upbringings couldn't be more different. Nicola is Muslim, and Andre was raised Jewish. They met in the late 30s, and they enjoy each other's company very much, but they are very well aware that they differ in almost everything, every matter that they discuss. They love talking to one another, but they seldom share any other activities together. And the relationship doesn't really follow either of the communities that they belong to. In sort of the kind of usual, you can use here whatever you want in terms of what you consider to be conventional sort of norms of friendship. They don't go to each other's birthdays. They're not there when something important happens, and may not return the calls. There's a lot that they do that's very idiosyncratic to them. And for outsiders, this is weird. Nobody understands why these people remain friends. But they are very happy with this, and they simply say that they enjoy their relationship as they have it, with the differences they have. So the question here is, what is the relationship between, what is the nature of the obligations, with one another that they have? Do they have shared commitments? And if so, what they are based on? I think we could put their intentions to maintain this friendship in the form, we shall be friends, shall it be the case that we are friends? Now, this is not we are friends because we share, accept R, X, Y, and Z. There is no shared identity in which this is based. None of the shared intentions that follow from it is based on a shared identity. So there is no substantive shared cultural identity or practical identity. And it also seems implausible to say that the intentions are shared because both friends belong to the same universal moral community. I will say a little bit more on that. The reason for this is because these obligations that they have to each other, which I will talk in a minute. For example, suppose that one is that if Andre has a concert, then Nicola has to go. That is the one that, that's what the friendship hangs on. But they are not extensible to anybody else. They don't think this should be extended to anybody else. So their intentions are directed to a particular another. For Nicola, it's Andre. For Andre, it's Nicola. This is a we, but it's a we that is more like you and me. You and me agree or, have these interpersonal obligations. And so it's these I-thou intentions that actually ground the we. So we could put this in the following way. Shall each of us, if it's up to me or you, the way. And in this case, they are moved from the egocentric perspective, but not because they share an identity. So how is this possible? Well, it seems that to be based in these mutual obligations or implicit interpersonal commitments that are directed to a particular other in those second personal I-thou obligations. Now, one can see this because there will be some deal breakers. If there are some deal breakers, it looks like those would be the mutual obligations they have. And that's what kind of grounds that in those norms that they need to respect. All right, so one possible reaction to this case that you might be having is to say, these obligations I derive from being one of us in a moral community. It's just any friends will have the same. I think this is not very plausible because they don't really take anybody else to have these commitments at all. It's very much an idiosyncratic matter between them. And they don't follow the rules of the communities. Now, a different response would be to say the opposite. Like, this is not a moral case at all. This is a parochial we with their own particular, it's just like the whooping crane society. I think this is implausible for the following, because I think they do have duties to each other, that entail or presuppose standards of corrections or norms of behavior with one another, that are responses or actions in the light of the good or what is right to do with respect to each other, and they are open to criticism and intersubjective validation with each other. And I think once all of that is true, then it seems to be the case that this is a case it's a moral case where moral judgments and moral actions are involved on the part of Andrea and Nicola. But you might remain unpersuaded, I think, maybe. I look at you, you don't look very persuaded, and still believe that either that this depends on a universal point of view, or that is not a case of morality at all. So in order to convince you to think differently about that case, perhaps I want to present you with another case, the case of unconditional love. The case of unconditional love, as I describe it in a very sort of long way, is Sandra, who has a daughter. And the story goes that Sandra, having this daughter really transformed Sandra. Sandra didn't want to have children. She thought this was an obstacle to her pursuits as a revolutionary in her youth. And that time and devotion to the cause will be lost because of this. But when she had Sophie, she realized that she has this love for her that is the source of a special kind of actions and that she didn't know she was capable of having. Now she is willing to do anything for her daughter's well-being, but she is not asking for anything in return, and this is different from the friendship case. She thinks whether her daughter is a good person, a good citizen, a good friend, a good daughter, doesn't matter. She's just completely committed to the well-being of her daughter. And she knows this is not going to change. Somehow she knows that these commitments are steady. There are no deal breakers. Now, she could express this by saying, I shall always love you, or shall I do anything for you, for your well-being. Again, in this case, there aren't any interpersonal obligations. Obligations are one-sided. Now, you might be thinking this is because it's her daughter. So as moral community members, we have duties to our children. Filial relations are kind of already framed in the moral community. So I invite you to pick your example, the one you like the most. I mean, one famous example could be Jesus in Unconditional Love. I don't know if everybody's familiar with the movie Breaking the Waves, Lars von Trier, Breaking the Waves. Oh, well, this is a woman that does things which go against sort of what would be the rules of the moral community with the aim of saving her husband. If you had seen any Lars von Trier movie, you probably have an example of this in others as well. All right. But pick your example of unconditional love as you want. Now, the issue here is that not only that there are no obvious we that support Sandra's commitment, but that these commitments they might not even be constrained by moral laws. She might go against what is morally required or acceptable, maybe, that happens in Breaking the Waves. No deal breakers. Now, you might think, wait a minute, this is not a case of moral behavior. because how is going to be a case of moral behavior? Is this person is willing to break the moral rules of the community? But of course that would be circular, right? We don't know yet that that's what it is for it to be a moral case. And I think it speaks to the idea that this might be a moral case, that Sandra has a duty towards another person, that puts obligations on her part, including potential sacrifices, that go against her own personal self-interest. These entail and presuppose standards of corrections of norms of behavior, acting in the light of what is good or what is right for another, including breaking the norms of the moral community, if that comes to be. Her actions are not egocentric. This is not an extension of her self-interest. She's acting selflessly, or the example you chose, right? So we might disagree with her actions, but still it seems that she's acting morally. Final example, again, is a bit long. This is the example of Jorge B. Jorge B was part of the repressive military forces that overtook the government by force in Argentina on the 24th of March of 1976. And as part of the military government, Jorge, he kidnapped, tortured, and killed people that were suspected of revolutionary activity. These actions were clandestine, not public, and there was no trial for those kidnapped, no charges proven, and the details of the destinies were never officially recorded or informed. And these activities, of course, were particularly vicious, cruel, violent, and so on. Now, Antonia is the daughter of Maria, and Maria was disappeared, tortured, and killed by Jorge. So when the democratic government returns, there is a trial for crimes against humanity, against the military, including Jorge, and the evidence against Jorge is overwhelming. He participated in what happened to Maria. There's no doubt about that. Yet Jorge does not acknowledge his crimes. He remains silent and decided not to offer testimony or give any information, any detail as to what happened to Maria. But despite this, Antonia decides to forgive Jorge. Now again, in my view, there's no obvious we here that explains Antonia's actions. It looks like an interpersonal, one-sided, one other-directed commitment. Jorge is the recipient of an act of disinterested, non-conditional forgiveness by Antonia. And we can express it by saying that Antonia says, I shall forgive you, and Jorge could receive this act in the form of, you forgive me, I have been forgiven by you. Yet, as in the case of love, there is not a straightforward reciprocity in this case. Nothing is required for Jorge for the act to take place, and there are no straightforward deal breakers, conditions upon which forgiveness is granted. Furthermore, in this case, forgiveness cannot be mandated. So Antonia is not following a rule in any standard sense of the term when she forgives Jorge. It is also not clear that Antonia supports her act in her belonging to any actual moral community, as it's not necessary that she takes Jorge to deserve forgiveness, that she takes him to be a rational being, that she takes him to be a member of the same moral community that she belongs to. Yet it seems clear that Antonia's act is a moral act. Why? Because she acts in the light of what is good or right to do. And I think in this case that will be enough to say that she's acting morally, even if we disagree what Antonia does. Now, what do these different cases have in common? They are actions and intentions of the persons involved are based on different kinds of second personal engagement that are anchored on the particularity of the persons involved. So it's Jorge for Antonia. It's not anybody else. And the same it's between Sandra and Sophie, and the same is between Nicola and Andrea. So they are special bondings or bonds that they have. And these acts are not subsumable under shared identities, shared rules, or universal oughts. We can think of these cases together as cases of second personal morality, in that the intentions at issue are duties or commitments to others that impose standards or corrections on both, in the case of friendship, or one, in the case of love and gift, was one-sided, without these being cases of following norms that are based in a shared or universal point of view or the belonging of a moral community. Yet despite not belonging to the universal moral community, they are cases of moral action, for they express the normative position of those who are agents of the acts. Normative positions that can be expressed in the form of I-thou intentions as such. Shall I forgive you? Shall I love you? Shall I help you? You are forgiven, loved, helped by me. The upshot of this analysis is that intentions directed to others, not based on a we, but also not private or singular, but second personal, can be groundings of moral interpersonal commitment, independently of whether there is a shared point of view on which they can be grounded. Now, I guess I need to say something, and this is where because everybody explained so well Sellars and discuss it, I sort of have a little bit more room to say something about what would be the view. And I still haven't proved my point, that how this is relevant to the topic, I guess, of morality, but not of intentionality yet. So let me give you a model that I have used in other places to understand this second personal morality as a case of second personal normativity. So I think we can understand these cases in the model of second personal address. And second personal address is pervasive in our form of life. There's commands, promises, requests, and other acts in which there are acts of second personal address. Okay. Now I want to relate this, and I have related this in a book that Preston is put together on the game of giving and asking for reasons. In other places, Michael Thompson's, maybe people are familiar with his paper, What it is to Wrong Someone, A Puzzle About Justice. He proposes that there are a collection of abstract forms of judgments that he thinks are intrinsically relational, and that they express forms of bipolar normativity. He thinks these are the essential forms of justice, of the forms of the relation of right. And these are the ones: X wrong Y by doing A, by not doing A. X has a duty to Y to do A, to not do A. X has a right against Y. Did I say Y? Yeah. X has a right against Y. That he do, that he not do A. So these forms of judgment express special bindings, normative bindings, that are bipolar in the normativity, in that in A, when X is wrong in B, in doing C, Y it's being wrong by A, by doing C. So in that means that there is the wronging and the rights, the duties and the rights are two sides of one same coin. Now I argue as well in the previous paper and the one I was talking about just now, that we can understand the normativity of orders and of another forms of second personal address by treating them as a form of bipolar judgment. And so the idea here is, when you give an order, and I follow this order, it's not as if you give the order and then there's a separate act by which I assess whether that the order is legitimate. Rather, if I take it to be an order that I hear myself as a legitimate order, then that it provides me eo ipso with a reason to act. I should do as you say. So understanding the order as a reason to act, so as an order, rather than something that I don't take to be an order really, means that I form the intention I should do A, if you order me to do A. In so doing, I understand this as a reason for me to act. So, but when I do this, it's because I'm endorsing your order as a good answer to the question, what is good or right to do. So I take this to be a reason for me to act, your order. So we can understand that this is it's an act of two, that your order and my acting according to the order, when they are properly considered to be based on reasons, they will be one, rather than two different related acts. So following this suggestion, I think we can understand friendship, love, and gift in the following way. The first one is a case of reciprocal, of reciprocal interaction, where they are friends, and this friendship implies that Nicola has duties to Andre, to do or not to do A. These are Nicola's rights. And, sorry, these are Andre's rights, I should say. The duties of Nicola are the rights to Andre, and vice versa. In non-reciprocal cases, in the cases I was talking about with unconditional love or unconditional forgiveness, there is Sandra, it's representing herself as having a duty to Sophie, and Antonia is representing herself as having a duty to Jorge, and Jorge, sorry, having a right Now, last final bit, and I think I'm good on time. Are these forms of we intentionality or not? And are these intersubjectively valid or not? So is second personal morality a special form of we intentionality? I argued that these cases at issue involve two agents linked by a special normative bond. And many people, many philosophers think that these are second personal, they are not we relations. But I disagree in the following way. Even if these forms of engagement need not be reciprocal, they are open to be reciprocated. I think Kirk gave an example with the shake. It's just like the shaking of the hands. You know, there is, in a way, something I said as well, is a sort of invitation to do something. Or even a solicitation, or even a demand, depending on the case we're taking. And even, it might not be recognized, it might not be reciprocated, but it still has this openness to be reciprocated by a corresponding act, which is the other side of the same coin. And so there's an openness to intentionality, to becoming a we. If you do reciprocate, then your forgiveness is my repentance. So now we are doing that. This is a case of intentionality, fully. The other one is a case of one directed, with a solicitation to respond. So in the case of second personal address, second personal engagements stand for reciprocation. They say conditions for you to respond properly. So if I give an order or make a promise, or these are things that are expecting to be reciprocated in a certain way. They have this normative expectation built into them. Now, the good thing about this, so they will be open to intentionality, not always cases of intentionality, but sort of like with an open space to be completed, a solicitation to be completed, that the other agent might refuse. And because of this, because it's up to each of one of them to do this, there is up to agentness in this kind of intentionality, because it will be up to Jorge to repent. And he might not do so. But if they are reciprocated, interestingly, they will be known to be shared. So that, I think, it's something that I was saying, well, how can these things be known to each other? Now, as I said, I don't want to say that every case of morality is like this. Just want to say that here are some cases, and what does it tell us about the relevance of shared points of view? That they might not matter so much, I think. But they matter in a different way, maybe. I don't know. This is the last bit, in the last maybe 4 minutes. Are these judgments intersubjectively valid? I want to say they are claims to intersubjective validity, because this comes from the analysis of the case of orders. When I issue the order, or someone issues the order to me, what makes me act is my taking the content of that order to be a reason for acting. So there is a dimension in which there is the second personal normative dimension, but there's also the content of the claim. And the content of the claim is such that it is required, because otherwise I couldn't act on it in light of what is right or is good for me. It would be just a reactive attitude. It wouldn't be acting what I think is right. So the content of the claim is important. And the idea is that when someone puts that for me to respond, that I can or cannot take it as a reason to respond. So we make each other available as acting in virtue of reasons. And that means that we're sharing authority and responsibility for the assessment of the actions and the claims in these cases according to reasons. And I might refuse to take it as a good, so I might not obey your order. I don't take it that I have a reason to do that. I don't consider it to be justified. Now, interestingly, and this is where I won't be, this is going to be very sketchy, but I think a lot of people would understand where the view comes from, and it's not that far from Sellars, I think, in this, is that reasons are shareable. And because reasons are shareable, that means that any rational agent that could enter in particular kinds of relations with other agents of second personal address could understand these reasons and could take them to be good reasons or bad reasons. Taking it here, for anyone positioned in that position, right, doesn't need to be a reason for me. that someone else is giving an order to another. But I can understand this as appropriate for someone to issue the order to another by understanding this as a good reason for that person to have, or each one person to have. Now, I'm implicitly using the idea that reasons are shareable entails a claim to objectivity or universal validity, so it's a notion of reasons as objective. I haven't argued in any detail. I think this is a notion that is available, and this is a notion I want. I have argued for this in other places, but I'm happy to discuss more. So, in as far as we understand these reasons, mutual criticism applies. So we can criticize Sandra for acting that way with the daughter, right? And when we do this, we take that it's not a good, she doesn't have a good reason to do what she's doing. And so it's not that we share the reasons, it's that the reasons might or might not be shared. There is a space of like controversy and mutual criticism around what we should do. Now, the we here appears as there's appearance of a we, and this we is something like the community of those that stand on interpersonal relations of address to one another, that can assess each other's reasons as valid, but it's not based, and we can also say that in doing something we put ourselves as a model of that should be the case. So that if we think that Sandra is acting morally, we can take Sandra as an example of what would be to act, be a good mother, for example, if we agree. Or we might think the opposite. Okay. Final slide, and in the dot. So is morality fraught with ought? I want to say, I argue that these intentions are not private, but not always collective. They are interpersonal. And they are infused by normativity, but not always in the form of general rules. As I said, I don't think that there aren't cases where substantial rules can be shared. It's just that there is more in the space of reasons of morality than that. And that is important for understanding the overall genus, of which, of course, we will need to say more. So I want to close with where I started. I started with Bill's quote that when we take ourselves as persons, we are agents acting for reasons in accordance with rules. And that is what it is to make ourselves persons. But I want to say maybe it's not about acting according to rules, but something like giving or withholding these invitations to participate in this space of morality or the space of reasons or morality. And that's it. Thank you.
Jeremy, do you want to start? Can everyone else keep their hands up, and I'll start a list whilst you're talking.
Thank you, Glenda. I really enjoyed that, and I think that is, you're pushing on a real potential weak spot for Sellars. But if I could maybe suggest ways in which he might not be totally vulnerable to this, hopefully. Obviously there's a category in the literature of agent-relative obligations, and in my book I suggest that not exactly cases like these, because your cases are much more detailed and much more well developed, but cases like these that he might treat as agent-relative obligations. Sellars, I mentioned this yesterday or the day before. I think it's in Science and Metaphysics, but I could be telling lies. He talks about an obligation that's restricted to a person or a group of people, and he says. So you said something like, there are certain cases where the we is grounded in an I-thou relation, and Sellars, I think Sellars wants to say, no, you never. When you're talking about obligation, the scope restriction is never on the we. The scope restriction is always in the circumstance clause, which is something you suggest and you reject, right? But I want to revisit that, because I actually think, so for example, the example you have of Sandra and Sophie. I think that the moral obligations that Sandra has to Sophie, She does have, because Sophie is her daughter. And I think the way we talk about this reflects the universal aspect of that. You would say to someone, you never lock your child in the closet or something like that. I don't know. The very use of the generic language suggests that this is a universal obligation that is binding on anyone who finds himself in this particular parent-child relationship. So it is universal, and it does attach to people who find themselves in these specific circumstances. Now, obviously, you describe this in a way that Sandra has this overwhelming, loving relationship to her daughter. But, to the extent that she has this overwhelming commitment to go above and beyond, I would regard that as, whatever obligation she has to Sophie are bounded in this sort of universal set of circumstance-specific obligations that are grounded in the moral law for Sellars. Anything that goes beyond that is not an obligation, it's just a commitment she has based on her overwhelming love. That's not obligation, that's just a commitment that she has based on her emotional attachment and her love. So I think Sellars can handle cases like this personally.
Thank you so much, and I need to engage in your book in detail and this but this is it's a bit of a. I get things a different way, but I think in this case I did say. I do realize that the case, because of the daughter, might look as if it's exactly as you are describing, that you also combine with the idea maybe it's not a moral case. So another case, I was doing something similar to what Bernard did with not ChatGPT. I'm not that, I still can't interact so much with that, but I would look on Google like examples of unconditional love. And overwhelmingly you get Jesus and several examples in the Bible. And I think what is good about Jesus in this case is that it's an example which I don't think is so easy to deny that it's a moral example. But it's also not clear that the sacrifice that Jesus makes is one that can be required by the moral law. It's not required. He goes the extra mile. And the same is in the way, I think that the daughter-mother relation is a distraction from what I want to say, though I do think interpersonal relations are informed by second-personal, these interpersonal kind of bindings. So it kind of, I was interested in that, but nothing to do with genetics. But the issue then is that there's something, the importance of the example is something unconditional. And that something unconditional, which I want by the example to be something that actually might go beyond what is required and it still can be an example of morality, which is a very difficult thought. Like we might not want. Now, I think there are several things in which I want to think, as I said at the beginning, very close to Sellars, and yet I think there might be a distinction because I want, in a way, I think you get the we when you get the question about whether you think that she did it right or not. This is an open question for anyone to think whether this should be the moral law or not. But it has two features. One, that it doesn't spring from a shared point of view, so we don't need to build in the need of having shared point of view, because we might not have it. We might not have it at all. We might disagree about whether this. So doesn't spring from the we to the case. Also, is intrinsically relational, which means that has that kind of feature of being shared. So the actuality or the reality of the moral community, at least in the case of two, is realized in each one case, which I also like. So So I think you might model the case in moral Sellarsian terms, but you will lose some of the features. So if we agree that we could regard a case of unconditional love, where one thing that did say about Jesus as well is that Jesus is not acting out of feeling, which I think is important in this case too. It's not the feeling, is that's the right thing to do. This paradigmatic. He puts himself as a paradigmatic example of something, which we understand as moral, as paradigmatically moral in a way that we can be. Even, extra, more human, not human, how do you say, otherly human, in ways that we can only emulate. So, yeah, I think that's is that? Okay.
Thank you. This is along the same lines as the question or the Jeremy made. So there are sort of high-level questions about Sellars' picture, that is whether it could actually ground these commitments in being rational. But suppose we just spot him that and then ask whether he can handle the kinds of cases that you've raised. And it does seem to me that it should be, in principle, flexible enough. Because whatever it is, the high-level content of the ideally shared intention, we're going to be able to derive various kinds of rules from that. And those rules can take into account the circumstances in which people find themselves. And the rules should also allow for sort of optional things. Entering into friendships is optional. Entering into contracts and agreements, making promises, all of these are things you're permitted to do. But once you've done them, then there can be requirements that flow from the circumstances in which you put yourself that look up to the highest level goal. And so the rules can be, universal, but when you apply them to the universe of persons, only some people get picked out as the ones to whom they apply in virtue of their having, for example, voluntarily entered into relations of friendship or raising children, or in this last complicated case of forgiveness, into a relation of having been harmed by another and then being permitted to relieve that person of the burden of guilt or, well, that's complicated. The kind of burden the person has taken on, so you relieve the person of that burden. So these are all rules that could flow from a very high level story about what the content of morality is, and they can flow down to these cases where you develop direct obligations to one another in virtue of voluntary actions.
Right. Thanks for that. Well, I think Sellars is not sure. This then is not sure. So the way I read in this, maybe we continue to be a matter of debate, but because I'm taking seriously he thinks it's a big challenge, the one that Bill picked up yesterday, of making the case that the community actually exists. The community of those who pursue the welfare of other rational beings, sans phrase. Now, he thinks that would stop any individual agent from acting, because you can think of the moral community and you can act as if the moral community existed. So if that's the kind of view you are proposing, where it's not the idea, there are different arguments would be to say, well, this community actually already exists. So sort of along the lines of Bernard was suggesting, and maybe Jeremy is also suggesting. So if that's the idea, I think this has several problems. One of the problems it has is that it looks like if I have a we intention, the fact there is something fail about this we intention, in that it's not fully realized, and in its reality it's not shown. Right? As a we intention, it's not complete, because where is the other that is doing their part? So I'm aware that this is a failure of the of the we intention in a way, and I'm aware of this. So that's weird. And Kant doesn't. I don't think Kant. I think Kant, but Sellars, because of his other, views on the nature of rational agents and agency and expressivism and all of this, he's committed to the actuality. He wants the we to be the we that does this, maybe in a way that cannot be. Well, this is something that Bill also said. So what happens is you get a model from Sellars of what it will be to account for these cases, but I think it's worse than this one. So it's not that you couldn't explain it, but you would explain it in a way in which, for example, one of the issues we talked about is what is the content of those moral laws? Does anyone have each one has their own interpretation of those laws? What is the space for for building that sort of mutual accountability? So I think, there are a number of issues which we've already been discussing, a lot of people have been discussing so far. So we know that there are issues with the way Sellars does it. I think, and so this is a different way of thinking about it, where I think what is salient in each one of the three cases is that there is no shared point of view. Because even if the categorical imperative is asking for a shared point of view in a way in which this is more like an invitation to the circle of persons, but it's not necessarily a shared point of view. It's more like, okay, we might disagree profoundly about the reason. So I don't think Antonia, when she forgives Jorge, she is removing a burden from him at all, indeed. It's more about what she takes to be correct. It could even be that something that relieves her from a burden or a connection with him. It's a way of letting go the either relation, right? But it's putting up a demand on him. Right? It's again, it's an example of, it's putting oneself as an example of a role model of what a moral relation will do, which is asking for him to repent, which he doesn't. So, yeah, this is not to say there are these shared norms, we don't know exactly what to do. There's no way in which, I don't think Jorge is in any way, I don't think Jorge, it's clear that Jorge is a member of them. In what way is Jorge a member of the moral, rational community that promotes the welfare of all rational beings? He's been killed. And so in any case, I think this is a more plausible view than the other.
Okay, thank you. I'm very sympathetic to what you talk. I'd like to continue this discussion about forgiveness a bit more, because I think I agree with you that it doesn't involve a shared point of view. Many people forgive their dead parents, for example, right? And there obviously is no shared point of view in these cases. But also maybe I'd like to resist the idea that this is something genuinely moral. Because like you weren't really saying much about Antonia's psychology, right? Behind that decision to forgive Jorge. And I think it's a bit more, in many cases, it might be more complicated than just forgiving for the sake of the good, right? And you suggested that in your last answer as well. I once read a very wise children's story, and it was precisely one agent inflicting a lot of pain on another agent. And then that other agent, that first agent, came into the position to be able to forgive that cruel agent. And she said, like, I will forgive because otherwise my heart would break. Yeah? It's like this heart, which has endured so much pain, would break if it nurtured the resentment. Yeah, so she forgave for her own sake and not so much as a gift to the other, as you said. So the idea would not be acting out of a sense of what is good to do or what is right to do, but just out of a sense of what helps me flourishing and maybe survive psychologically. And it might be good, of course, independently of that. But isn't this really a case which needs to be understood in these moral terms?
No, okay, thank you for that. Yeah, I think that in discussion I did say that Mary acted for relieving herself of the binding. But the way I want to think of this is I'm not thinking of this as a reactive attitude, an emotion of hate. There might be all kinds of emotions involved, but that's not what I'm trying to get at. So this is what I'm trying to get at. When you act, and there is a question in this action about what it would be to act rightly, your answer to what you do is an answer to the question that was the right thing to do, even if you didn't even consider it. Right? When you do something, why is it wrong what Jorge did? Because it was wrong to do that, even if he didn't, whatever he, so action as a response to a consideration of what is that should be done, or something like this, is the idea of acting in the light of what is good. So she's acting because that is the right thing to do. You could say that even not hating could be the right thing to do. Yeah, we can think of Jesus again. Not hating is the right thing to do. She is an example of the moral agent. She forgives as a gift because he didn't ask for forgiveness. It's not a case, she's not demanded to do it. But she takes this to be the right thing to do. That's the idea. And so, but the idea is that she need to have a fully articulated conception of the maximizing the welfare of every rational being? No, she just needs to think, is it right to forgive this person today, here? And if she's a moral agent, we talk about this when Natalie's talk about what Kyle was citing, Sellars talking about conversion. I don't think it's a conversion. I think it's a matter of who you are, which can take years of life to get to. It's not something that, suddenly I'm a moral agent. It's a matter of, complicated life experience and so on. But that's what I'm talking about. So it's not so much a matter of, even if all emotions involved, it's a response that she's acting in the light of the good or what is right for her to do. And as such, she's a moral agent, even if she doesn't have an articulated conception of what it is to act morally. Right? And she might get it wrong. Maybe Sandra gets it wrong with Sophie.
Thank you so much for this. I'll be asking about the same thing that Jeremy and Kirk raised. And so I'm sorry if I'm asking you to just say again what you said to them. I don't mean to do that. I really like the cases, and I like the detail, because it's a reminder that most of our moral discourse occurs at a very concrete level. And when you were going through the cases, I had in mind a paper you didn't cite, but on science and ethics, right, where he's talking about the data of ethics, that they're the concrete moral judgments that we make. Right? So we have a lot of data of ethics here, and what I was trying to do in each case was do the hypothetico-deductive model of going from the particular evaluations to maxims, and then up to first principles. And I think what the cases shows, most of the time we're perfectly happy sticking at the level of particular evaluations and maxims, right? So we ought to buy playing cards because the Smiths are coming, and when they come, we play bridge with them, right? And it just stops there. Yeah. And in these cases, yeah, you're right. They aren't thinking of a universal or kingdom of ends. They aren't deriving these things from the top level. But I think the issue is whether they're derivable. Could we formulate a first principle that would capture these? And I think what you said to Jeremy was, yeah, maybe we could. Sellars could have something to say here, but we'd be leaving something out when we go from the second personal to the first person plural abstract. What would we be leaving out?
Thank you for that. Now, definitely, something as you described might give you. I'm not even convinced that it gives you friendship, but it might give you friendship. Nicola and Andrea might give you, but not more than I don't think. But the reason is because there is this unconditional, this idea of exemplarity of moral agency as something that can be even beyond our understanding of the moral law. I mean, that's what Jesus would be that. It's beyond it's beyond the scope of. It's not morally required. It might go against the morally permissible. Now, what I want to preserve, that's where I think I'm sort of really kind of like Sellars, and so I'm not get that far. At the end, when I come back to the idea, what is to share a reason? And so in that space, that's why Jeremy and I can have a discussion about what is really, Sandra about. And so Jeremy can be thinking, well, we can model this in terms of this other conception, because the reason she has are not the reason she say she has, or not even the reason that she should have. So there is a space there of a certain debate. But I think the pulling of the case is such that if we see the force of the case as a case where they somehow, the interesting from the friendship to the unconditional love is that you lose the deal breakers, you lose the you lose the containment of those norms. And now there is a kind of exemplarity of the case that is supposed to show something that can be even beyond. It's definitely beyond what is required. And I think in some examples it might even be, which is more controversial, beyond what is permissible. Right? So I don't, but it's controversial because there might be cases in which this stops being moral, and it's how far is Sandra going to go for something? That's a worry one might have, right? And that's what I was thinking of that is if she does something against another, she will be in another relation of binding with this other person, and she will be wronging them. And so we can still say that she's acting wrongly in regards to this other agent that she's harming because of the sake of Sophie. So, but it's not. So it's not out of. It's not, and this is very different. It's not the same to say I have this principle that applies to all cases of type X, which is a model that Sellars is using here, which has shall intention. Every I there is like a placeholder for anyone. Than to say I have these relations with each one of you from which we cannot try to make explicit a possible rule that we might be following or not, and that we might disagree about which one it is. So I think that the structure of the theories is very different.